The 25th missed call came at 3:47 a.m., and somehow I already knew it would change everything. I sat curled in my grandmother's old rocking chair on the cabin porch, wrapped in the quilt she'd made me years ago, watching my phone light up with Marcus's name 25 times. After 2 days of blessed silence in these Oregon mountains, 2 days since my own family had shattered my heart into pieces. "You've ruined our lives," Marcus had screamed at me, his face twisted with a desperation I'd been funding for 3 years without realizing it. But it was my mother's words that had cut deepest, delivered with the calm cruelty only a mother could perfect. "We'd be happier without you." I hadn't fought back, hadn't reminded them of the medical bills I'd paid, the business loans I'd co-signed, the endless emergencies I'd solved with my own savings. I simply kissed my mother's cheek, a habit born from 34 years of love, gathered my dignity, and driven straight to the one place that had never asked anything of me. Grandma Rose's cabin had always been my sanctuary. Here, surrounded by Douglas firs and the sound of rushing water over stones, I could breathe again. But tonight felt different. Tonight, there was a legal envelope on the kitchen table addressed to Sarah Chen, property owner, words that made no sense at all. Tonight, Detective Morrison had left a voicemail about fraud charges and forged documents that apparently bore my signature. The phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. This time, it wasn't Marcus. It was a number I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I read the text. "Miss Chen, your brother is in federal custody. You may be the only one who can save him. But first, you need to know what your family has been hiding from you for 34 years. I set the phone down and stared into the darkness, my heart pounding with equal parts dread and something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 months earlier, saying no felt like the cruelest thing imaginable. Back then, the word caught in my throat every time Marcus called with another temporary setback. His voice would crack just enough to remind me of the big brother who used to check under my bed for monsters, who'd taught me to ride a bike in this very driveway. How could anyone refuse the person who once promised he'd always protect you? But protecting had become a one-way street somewhere along the way. Mom's medical emergencies always seemed to coincide with my paydays. Heart palpitations that required expensive specialists, mysterious back pain that needed urgent imaging. Each time, she'd apologize with tears in her eyes, promising this would be the last time she'd need help. "You're such a blessing, sweetheart," she'd whisper, and guilt would flood through me for even questioning her needs. Lisa's dreams came with price tags that grew heavier each year. The artisan bakery that needed industrial ovens, the catering business that required a food truck. Each venture launched with such hope, such certainty that this time would be different. When they failed, her disappointment was so genuine that comforting her felt more important than protecting my depleting savings account. Financial advisor by profession, fool by choice, that's what I'd become, helping clients build wealth while watching my own disappear into the endless pit of family obligations. The irony wasn't lost on me, but love made hypocrites of even the most logical minds. Everything changed the night Dr. Martinez called about my therapy breakthrough. For months, she'd been gently suggesting that my need to rescue everyone stemmed from childhood wounds, the belief that being needed was the only way to be loved. That evening, staring at my bank balance of $247 after Marcus's latest emergency, her words finally landed with devastating clarity. The confrontation happened at Mom's Sunday dinner, around the same oak table where we'd shared countless meals, countless conversations, countless lies disguised as love. When Marcus asked for $5,000 to cover what he swore was his final gambling debt, something inside me quietly broke. "No," escaped my lips before I could stop it. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then came the explosion. Accusations of selfishness, reminders of family loyalty, guilt trips wrapped in righteous indignation. Marcus paced the kitchen like a caged animal, while Mom dabbed her eyes with calculated precision. Lisa sat frozen, watching the family dynamic she'd never questioned suddenly crack apart. "You think you're better than us because you have money?" Marcus's voice rose with each word. "You've ruined our lives." Mom's final blow came quietly, aimed with surgical precision. "We'd be happier without you." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, impossible to take back. Now, sitting in Grandma Rose's refuge with that mysterious envelope burning a hole through my peace of mind, one terrifying question echoed through the mountain silence. What if they'd been lying about more than just their gratitude? Dawn crept through the cabin windows like a cautious animal, painting everything in shades of uncertainty. Sleep had been impossible after Detective Morrison's call, so the early hours were spent pacing between rooms that held 30 years of memories. Summers learning to fish with Grandpa, afternoons baking cookies with Grandma Rose, evenings when this place felt more like home than anywhere else. The legal envelope sat unopened on the kitchen counter, its presence as heavy as a storm cloud. Property owner. Those words made no sense in any context that included this family's financial struggles. Every mortgage payment discussion, every property tax conversation, every mention of family land had painted a picture of collective ownership, shared responsibility, communal burden. Outside, the Douglas firs whispered secrets the wind carried from ridge to ridge. Grandma Rose used to say the mountains held all the family stories, that sometimes you had to listen very carefully to hear the truth beneath the surface noise. Her voice seemed to echo now through the morning stillness. Some truths wait generations to be spoken, Sweet Pea. Phone calls interrupted the mountain meditation. First, Lisa's tearful voicemail about Marcus disappearing overnight, then Mom's carefully controlled message asking for an immediate callback. Their voices carried undertones of panic that felt different from the usual manufactured crises. This urgency held genuine fear, the kind that couldn't be faked or manipulated for financial gain. Mrs. Patterson, the neighboring woman who'd been Grandma Rose's closest friend for 40 years, appeared at the cabin door with a thermos of coffee and eyes full of concern. "Heard your car pull in night before last," she said, settling into the porch swing like she belonged there. "Rose always said you'd come back here when the family secrets finally caught up with everyone." Family secrets. The phrase hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. What secrets could there be? The question emerged smaller than intended, carrying decades of assumptions about transparent family dynamics, honest communication, shared truths. Mrs. Patterson's weathered hands wrapped around her coffee mug, steam rising between them like incense. "Rose kept a journal, honey, wrote in it every day for 20 years, documenting things she was too afraid to say out loud. Things about your grandpa's will, about property ownership, about promises made and broken." The morning air suddenly felt thinner, harder to breathe. Where is this journal? Hidden where little girls used to build fairy houses and dream about futures that seemed impossible. Her smile carried both warmth and sadness. "Rose said you'd know the place when you were ready to find it." Heat flooded through every nerve ending as childhood memories surfaced. The hollow space beneath the ancient oak's exposed roots, the secret hiding spot where treasures and letters to Santa had been carefully buried. That tree had been the guardian of every important childhood secret, every whispered wish, every promise made to an uncertain future. Standing required effort. Walking toward the oak felt like approaching a courtroom where the verdict would rewrite everything. Each step through the morning dew carried the weight of 34 years of assumptions about to be challenged. At the base of the tree, the familiar hollow waited, unchanged by time but somehow larger than memory suggested. Inside lay a metal box wrapped in plastic, and resting on top, an envelope marked with familiar handwriting. For Sarah, open when you're brave enough to learn who really owns your life. The metal box opened like Pandora's own container, releasing truths that had been festering in darkness for decades. Grandma Rose's journal lay on top, its leather cover worn smooth by countless worried hands. The first entry, dated 34 years ago, began with words that made the mountain air feel suddenly thin. Today, we welcomed baby Sarah into the world, and today I signed the papers that will change everything. James doesn't know yet that his father's will leaves the entire property to his daughter, not his wife. Some gifts come with burdens too heavy for small shoulders. Page after page revealed a family history built on careful omissions and protective lies. Grandfather Chen's will had been crystal clear. 47 acres of Oregon mountain land would belong to his first granddaughter, the child he'd never lived to meet, but somehow knew would need a foundation stronger than her parents could provide. The legal transfer had happened at birth, filed quietly while everyone focused on celebrating new life. Mom had known from the beginning. Every property tax discussion, every mention of mortgage payments, every family financial crisis had been performed against the backdrop of her secret knowledge. The woman who'd raised her daughter to believe in family sacrifice had been orchestrating that sacrifice while sitting on land that wasn't hers to leverage. But the journal's most devastating entries came later, documenting Marcus's slow descent into gambling addiction with clinical precision. Marcus reminds me so much of his biological father. David Park was charm and desperation wrapped in the same dangerous package. The boy doesn't know his real father died in a casino parking lot with nothing left but debts and broken promises. Some patterns skip a generation, but this one didn't. The revelation hit like physical pain. Marcus wasn't just struggling with addiction. He was repeating the exact patterns of a father he'd never known existed. Mom had watched him spiral while hiding the family history that might have helped him understand his demons. Instead of intervention, she'd chosen enablement, funded by someone else's sacrifice. Deeper in the box lay bank statements that painted an even darker picture. For 3 years, while Marcus had been borrowing money for emergencies, Mom had been taking small loans against the property, always managing to pay them back before anyone noticed. The medical emergencies, the urgent bills, the desperate need for financial help, most of it had been fabricated to keep the family's true financial status hidden while maintaining her daughter's sense of obligation. The cruelest document was a loan application dated 6 months ago, bearing a forged signature that looked convincingly like careful handwriting. Someone had been practicing replicating signatures, perfecting the art of financial identity theft within the family structure. $200,000, approved based on property ownership that the signatory didn't even know she possessed. Mrs. Patterson's voice drifted from the cabin porch where she'd remained, giving privacy for this devastating discovery. Rose hoped you'd never need to find that box, honey. She prayed your family would choose honesty over manipulation, but she also knew love sometimes requires preparation for heartbreak. Marcus's arrest suddenly made terrible sense. Federal fraud charges for using someone else's property as collateral, forging documents with practiced precision, stealing from the very person who'd been funding his addiction for years. The 25 missed calls weren't desperate pleas for help. They were panic at getting caught in a web of lies that had been growing for months. Phone notifications buzzed insistently from the cabin, each alert carrying more desperate messages from family members who'd built their entire existence on a foundation of deception. Mom's texts grow increasingly frantic. "Please come home. This is all a misunderstanding. We can explain everything if you'll just listen." But explaining required acknowledging that every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every moment of shared laughter had been contaminated by secrets that made a mockery of the love they claimed to share. The final item in the box was a sealed letter marked "Emergency Instructions if the lies become too heavy to carry." Inside, Grandma Rose's handwriting offered one last gift: the phone number for a lawyer who specialized in family financial fraud, and the location of a safety deposit box containing documents that would either save the family or destroy it completely. The choice was no longer about forgiveness or boundaries. It was about justice versus mercy, truth versus the comfortable lies that had held everyone together for so long. The safety deposit box at First National Bank held documents that rewrote 34 years of family history with surgical precision. Mrs. Patterson had driven down from the mountains, her weathered hands steady on the steering wheel while her passenger's world crumbled and reformed with each mile. "Rose made me promise to be here for this," she'd said quietly. "Some truths are too heavy to carry alone." Inside the sterile bank vault, fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows over papers that told a story more complex than simple property ownership. The first document was a marriage certificate dated 1985, not for Mom and Dad's wedding, but for Mom's first marriage to a man named David Park. Attached was a death certificate from 1987, listing cause of death as vehicular accident, blood alcohol level fatal, location outside Silver Creek Casino. Marcus and Lisa had a father they'd never known existed, a man whose gambling addiction had consumed everything before their children were old enough to remember his face. Mom had buried that history so completely that even the siblings' birth certificates had been amended after Dad's adoption proceedings, erasing David Park from official family records, as if love could legislate away genetics. But genetics, it seemed, had its own stubborn persistence. The bank manager, a kind woman named Elena Rodriguez, had been expecting this visit for months. "Your grandmother left specific instructions," she explained, pulling out additional files. "She wanted you to understand the full scope of your inheritance before making any decisions about your family's future." The inheritance extended far beyond mountain property. Grandfather Chen had been a shrewd businessman who'd invested in Portland real estate when the market was still affordable. 3 rental properties downtown, all managed through a trust that had been generating income for decades. Income that had been quietly supporting Mom's fabricated lifestyle while she convinced her daughter to subsidize fictional emergencies. Elena's computer screen showed bank statements that painted an entirely different picture of family finances. The medical bills that had seemed so overwhelming paid from trust funds established specifically for healthcare expenses. The business loans that had supposedly drained family resources covered by revenue from properties that technically belonged to someone who'd been kept ignorant of their existence. "Your grandmother was very specific about the revelation timing," Elena continued, her voice gentle but firm. "She wanted you to discover this after you'd learned to set boundaries, after you'd proven you could say no to manipulation. She believed you'd need that strength for what comes next." What came next was documented in a folder marked Emergency Protocols, detailed plans for handling the exact scenario that was now unfolding. Grandma Rose had anticipated Marcus's addiction progression, Mom's increasing desperation, and the eventual fraud that would force everything into the open. Every contingency had been planned, every legal protection established, every escape route mapped. But the most devastating revelation came in a sealed envelope containing DNA test results from a lab in Seattle. The tests, ordered by Grandma Rose months before her death, revealed biological relationships that no one had questioned but should have examined more carefully. Marcus and Lisa shared DNA markers that confirmed their Park heritage, but there was something else, something that made the room feel like it was spinning on an axis that had suddenly shifted. The genetic profile showed a paternal match that couldn't be explained by either David Park or James Chen. According to the DNA analysis, Marcus had a different biological father entirely, a man whose identity was revealed in the final document Elena pulled from the vault. Senator William Ashford, now deceased, had been David Park's gambling partner in the months before his death. The affair that had produced Marcus had been hidden so completely that even Mom might not have known the truth until Grandma Rose's private investigation uncovered it. The child she thought was David's son was actually the biological offspring of one of Oregon's most prominent political families. The implications crashed through the small bank room like a tidal wave. Marcus wasn't just struggling with inherited addiction tendencies, he was the unacknowledged heir to a political dynasty worth millions. The Ashford Family Trust, established to provide for any biological descendants, had been waiting 31 years for someone to make a legitimate claim. Elena's phone rang, interrupting the stunned silence. After a brief conversation, she turned back with an expression that mixed professional composure with barely contained amazement. "That was your family's attorney," she said carefully. "Apparently, someone has been monitoring these bank records for years, waiting for this information to surface. Senator Ashford's estate lawyers want to meet with you immediately." Outside the bank, Mom's car was parked across the street, her silhouette visible through the windshield as she waited with the patience of someone who knew their carefully constructed world was about to explode. But the woman watching from the black sedan parked behind her remained hidden, though her license plate suggested connections that would make the morning's revelations seem simple by comparison. The confrontation happened in Mom's living room, surrounded by family photos that now felt like evidence of a decades-long deception. Elena Rodriguez had insisted on accompanying this family meeting, bringing documents that would either heal or destroy what remained of their bonds. Mom sat rigidly on her floral sofa, the same one where countless Sunday dinners had been planned, where childhood scraped knees had been bandaged, where love had been expressed through small, daily kindnesses that now felt contaminated by larger lies. Marcus entered through the back door, like he always had, but federal ankle monitoring had replaced his usual swagger. The brother who'd once carried her on his shoulders now moved with the careful precision of someone's freedom hung by legal threads. His eyes avoided contact, focusing instead on the stack of DNA results Elena spread across the coffee table. 31 years. Mom's voice came out as barely a whisper. 31 years of wondering if this day would come. Lisa arrived last, still wearing her bakery apron dusted with flour, her confusion evident in every gesture. She'd been pulled from her afternoon rush without explanation, summoned to witness the dismantling of everything she'd believed about their family structure. Her hands shook as she reached for the document that would rewrite her understanding of her brother's identity. "William Ashford was your father, Marcus." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would reach every corner of their shared history. Marcus's reaction was immediate and physical, a sharp intake of breath, followed by the hollow laugh of someone's world had just inverted. So the gambling addiction, the desperate schemes, the constant need for more, all of that came from Park genetics that aren't even mine? Addiction patterns can be learned behavior, not just inherited, Elena explained gently. But there's more you need to know about your biological father's family. The Ashford Trust documents painted a picture of wealth so vast, it made their mountain property seem quaint by comparison. Political connections, real estate holdings, investment portfolios that had been growing unchecked for decades, all waiting for legitimate heirs to claim their inheritance. Marcus wasn't just the unknown son of a senator, he was the potential beneficiary of a fortune that could solve every financial problem their family had ever manufactured or genuinely faced. But Lisa's question cut through the magnitude of inherited wealth with devastating simplicity. If Marcus is really an Ashford, what does that make our family? What does that make us? The silence stretched like a held breath until Mom finally spoke, her voice carrying 30 years of carefully buried shame. It makes us people who've been living a lie because the truth felt too dangerous to tell. She walked to her bedroom and returned with a shoebox that had clearly been hidden for decades. Inside were letters, photographs, and legal documents that told the complete story. The affair with Senator Ashford, the pregnancy that coincided with David Park's final gambling binge, the death that had eliminated any possibility of paternity questions, and the decision to let everyone assume Marcus belonged to the dead husband rather than the living senator. William knew, Mom continued, her hands trembling as she sorted through photographs that showed a man who shared Marcus's jawline and smile. He offered financial support, but I was terrified of what his family would do to keep their reputation intact. Politicians have made inconvenient children disappear before. The photographs revealed secret meetings, careful financial arrangements, and a father who'd watched his son from a distance for years before his own death in a private plane crash. Marcus had been at his biological father's funeral without knowing it, standing in the crowd while his half-siblings mourned publicly, and he remained an unacknowledged secret. Elena's phone buzzed with a text that made her expression shift from professional neutrality to genuine concern. The Ashford family's legal team has been monitoring bank activity tied to the trust accounts. They know about today's revelations, and they're requesting an immediate meeting. Outside, the black sedan that had been trailing them since the bank now sat in the driveway, its occupants no longer bothering with surveillance subtlety. Through the living room window, two figures in expensive suits approached the front door with the confident stride of people accustomed to getting exactly what they wanted. The doorbell's cheerful chime seemed almost mocking, given the gravity of what was about to unfold. Marcus stood slowly, his face pale but determined. 31 years of wondering why nothing ever felt quite right. Now I guess we find out what truth actually costs. But as Mom reached for the door handle, Elena grabbed her wrist with unexpected urgency. Before you let them in, there's one more thing the DNA results revealed, something that changes everything about who gets to make decisions here. The pause felt infinite, loaded with possibilities that could reshape not just their family, but their understanding of power, inheritance, and the price of keeping dangerous secrets. The final DNA revelation emerged from Elena's briefcase like a loaded weapon aimed at everything the Ashford family believed they could control. The genetic testing revealed something else, Elena said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to unleash. Sarah, you're not James Chen's biological daughter either. The words hit like a physical blow, stealing breath and balance in equal measure. Mom's face went ashen as the doorbell continued its insistent chiming. The Ashford representatives waiting outside while inside, the last pillar of assumed family structure crumbled into dust. Senator Ashford was your father, too, Alina continued, spreading additional documents across the coffee table. The affair lasted longer than your mother admitted. You and Marcus are full siblings, both Ashford heirs, both entitled to equal shares of one of Oregon's largest family fortunes. Marcus stared across the room with an expression that mixed shock, relief, and something approaching vindication. The sister who'd been funding his addiction, covering his gambling debts, and sacrificing her own financial security was actually his blood relative, and they'd both been systematically denied their true inheritance while being manipulated into supporting a family built on lies. Through the window, one of the suited figures pressed his face against the glass. The Ashford legal team had clearly come prepared for negotiation with one unexpected heir, not two legitimate children who could dismantle their carefully maintained family narrative and claim substantial portions of inherited wealth. How long have they known? The question came out steadier than expected, carrying years of suppressed anger and newfound understanding. Mom's voice broke as she answered, "William's private investigator contacted me 6 months ago. They'd been monitoring the trust accounts, watching for any claims against the estate. When Marcus started taking loans against your property, it triggered financial alerts that led back to the DNA evidence William had collected years ago." The fraud charges suddenly made perfect sense. Marcus hadn't just been stealing from his sister, he'd been unknowingly stealing from family trust funds that legally belonged to both of them. The Ashford legal team had orchestrated his arrest not to protect their client's reputation, but to control the narrative around their newfound heirs and ensure any inheritance claims happened on their terms. Lisa's quiet sobbing provided heartbreaking background music to these revelations. The sister who'd struggled with learning disabilities, who'd failed at business after business, who'd never quite belonged in their family dynamic, she was the only one who was actually related to the people who'd raised her. The only legitimate Chen family member was the one who'd always felt like an outsider. Elena's phone buzzed with an urgent message that made her complexion pale. The Ashford family's attorneys just filed emergency court papers requesting guardianship over any inheritance claims. They're arguing that both of you are psychologically compromised by recent trauma and need legal protection from making financial decisions. Outside, the suited figures had been joined by additional vehicles, official-looking cars with government plates, and security personnel who suggested the Ashford family's influence extended far beyond simple wealth into realms of political power that could make inconvenient heirs disappear into legal complexities for decades. The realization hit with stunning clarity. This wasn't just about family secrets or hidden inheritance. This was about a political dynasty protecting itself from scandal, from two adult children who could demand not just money, but acknowledgement, not just inheritance, but legitimacy. The timing of Marcus's arrest, the pressure on family finances, the manufactured crises that had kept everyone focused on survival instead of asking questions, all of it had been orchestrated to prevent this exact moment. Mom reached for her daughter's hand with trembling fingers, her voice carrying decades of fear and regret. "The night you were born, William's security team visited me in the hospital. They made it very clear that his children would be better off not knowing their true parentage, that the Ashford family had ways of ensuring inconvenient relatives stayed inconvenient." Through the front window, movement in the black sedans suggested the waiting period was ending. Doors opened simultaneously, revealing not just lawyers, but security personnel whose presence transformed this family confrontation into something far more dangerous. Marcus moved toward the back door with the instincts of someone whose freedom had already been threatened once. They're not here to negotiate, they're here to contain. But escape routes had been anticipated. Through the kitchen window, additional vehicles blocked the rear driveway, and figures in dark clothing positioned themselves around the property with the precision of a carefully planned operation. The doorbell stopped ringing, replaced by the authoritative knock of people who no longer intended to wait for permission to enter. Elena gathered the DNA documents with swift efficiency, shoving them into a briefcase that suddenly seemed like the most valuable object in the room. There's one more thing William left for you, something he hoped you'd never need, but prepared in case his family tried to silence his children. The sound of keys rattling in the front door lock made everyone freeze. The Ashford family had apparently come prepared with more than legal papers and intimidation tactics. The keys belonged to Jake Martinez, the park ranger who'd been watching the property surveillance from his patrol station and had decided that whatever was happening required immediate intervention. His entrance through the front door coincided perfectly with Elena pressing a hidden button on her briefcase, a signal that activated recording devices William Ashford had secretly installed throughout Mom's house years ago. Every word spoken in the last hour had been documented, creating an unbreachable legal record of the Ashford family's intimidation tactics and the truth about their hidden heirs. Forest Service has jurisdiction over this entire area during federal investigations, Jake announced to the startled legal team, his badge and radio crackling with backup communications. This property is now under protective custody pending resolution of fraudulent land use claims. The Ashford attorneys found themselves outmaneuvered by environmental law and a park ranger who'd apparently been coordinating with federal investigators for weeks. Their expensive suits and political connections meant nothing against jurisdiction they'd never anticipated, protection they couldn't circumvent through traditional influence channels. Elena's revelation about William's final gift came in the form of a trust document that had been sealed for 30 years, waiting for exactly this confrontation. The senator had anticipated his family's reaction to his illegitimate children and had created an irrevocable protection mechanism: financial independence that couldn't be challenged, legal standing that couldn't be erased, and evidence that would destroy the Ashford political legacy if anything happened to his heirs. The trust's terms were devastatingly simple. Marcus and his sister would receive their full inheritance immediately upon threat or intimidation from other family members. The Ashford family's aggressive response had triggered automatic wealth transfer that no legal maneuvering could reverse. Their attempt to control the situation had actually accelerated the very outcome they'd tried to prevent. Mom's confession came through tears that seemed to wash away decades of carefully maintained deception. "William made me promise to tell you the truth if his family ever threatened you. He said powerful people often underestimate the strength of women who've learned to survive on their own terms." The financial revelations transformed everything about their family's future. Marcus's gambling debts vanished against the backdrop of inherited millions. Lisa's failed businesses became learning experiences rather than family burdens. The mountain property could remain a sanctuary rather than a financial necessity, supported by resources that made money worries obsolete for generations. But the most profound healing came through understanding rather than wealth. Marcus's addiction made sense within the context of learned family trauma and genetic predisposition, patterns that could be addressed through professional help rather than enabling. Lisa's struggles reflected learning differences that had been ignored rather than accommodated, challenges that proper support could overcome. The fraud charges against Marcus were dropped when federal investigators discovered the Ashford family's orchestrated campaign to criminalize their political rivals' heirs. What had appeared to be sibling betrayal was revealed as external manipulation designed to keep legitimate heirs focused on survival rather than inheritance claims. Recovery became a family project rather than an individual burden. Marcus entered a treatment program designed specifically for people with inherited wealth and addiction issues, a combination of therapy, financial education, and purpose-driven work that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. His healing journey included Lisa and their mother, all of them learning to communicate truth instead of managing crisis. The mountain property transformed into a retreat center for families dealing with financial trauma and inherited addiction, a way to honor Grandma Rose's memory while helping others break cycles of dysfunction. The work felt meaningful in ways that simple wealth accumulation never could, creating purpose from pain and community from isolation. 6 months later, standing on the cabin porch where this journey had begun, the view encompassed more than mountains and trees. The landscape included possibilities that had been invisible when survival was the primary concern, dreams that had seemed impossible when every resource went toward managing other people's choices. Jake's presence on the porch swing represented something Grandma Rose had always hoped for her granddaughter: love that supported rather than depleted, partnership that enhanced rather than diminished, companionship that celebrated strength rather than exploiting vulnerability. The 25th missed call had indeed changed everything, but not in the way anyone could have anticipated. What had begun as family crisis had become family healing. What had started as betrayal had revealed deeper truths about love, loyalty, and the courage required to choose growth over comfort. Evening light painted the mountains in shades of gold and possibility, and for the first time in years, silence felt like peace rather than the calm before another storm. 1 year later, the invitation arrived on cream-colored paper that felt substantial enough to frame, an invitation to the first annual Breaking Chains Conference for families recovering from financial manipulation and inherited trauma. Marcus would be the keynote speaker, sharing his journey from addiction and fraud charges to becoming a certified financial recovery counselor. His story had become a beacon for others trapped in cycles of enabling and desperation, proof that healing was possible even after hitting absolute bottom. The conference had drawn families from across the country, all seeking the tools to transform dysfunction into health. Mom had started a support group for parents learning to love without controlling, mothers and fathers who'd confused protection with manipulation and were working to rebuild relationships based on truth rather than obligation. Her courage in facing her own trauma had inspired dozens of other parents to examine their family patterns and choose growth over comfort. Lisa's bakery had become the conference venue, her business finally thriving once learning accommodations allowed her natural creativity to flourish. The same woman who'd struggled with financial concepts was now successfully managing a company that employed 12 people and donated profits to family recovery programs. Her journey proved that perceived failures often masked unaddressed needs rather than fundamental inadequacies. The retreat center on the mountain property hosted monthly workshops where families learned to distinguish between love and enabling, support and control, helping and healing. Grandma Rose's cabin had become a sanctuary for honest conversations that some families had been avoiding for generations. The work felt like the best possible tribute to a woman who'd believed in truth even when it was painful. Jake's proposal had happened on the same porch where the healing journey began, his words simple and strong. Build a life with me based on choice, not need. Their wedding would take place next month among the Douglas firs, surrounded by family members who'd learned to celebrate each other's strength rather than exploit each other's vulnerabilities. The final entry in Grandma Rose's journal, discovered just last week in a hidden compartment of her desk, offered words that felt like a blessing from beyond. True family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about people who choose to love you not for what you can provide, but for who you are when everything else is stripped away. Evening light painted the mountains in familiar shades of gold, but the woman watching from the porch was fundamentally different from the one who'd fled here a year ago. The silence no longer felt lonely because it had been chosen rather than imposed, earned rather than endured. Here's what I want you to remember. You don't owe anyone your financial future simply because they share your DNA. Love doesn't require you to fund other people's dysfunction or sacrifice your dreams for their comfort. Ask yourself tonight, who in your life confuses needing you with loving you? What patterns are you funding instead of healing? What would change if you chose your own peace over other people's approval? Your story doesn't have to end the way it began. Choose yourself. Choose truth. Choose the difficult conversations that lead to real love instead of the easy silence that enables continued pain. You deserve a family that celebrates your boundaries, not one that punishes them.